Yay. Hi, everyone. It's KK, and I'm back with another fireside chat. Today's guest is somebody that you might recognize, but Shawn, I will let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, folks. My name is Shawn VanDiver. I am a Navy veteran. I live in San Diego, California, and I helped launch the AfghanEvac coalition with my buddy Lucky because he was stuck on a mountain in Rangoon on August 14th and said, "Brother, I'm stuck on this mountain. We're surrounded by the Taliban. We're running out of ammunition. I think I'm going to die. Will you please grant my last wish and help get my family back to San Diego?" A year later, here we are.
That was very succinct. And I have to point out, guys, that Shawn is also the reason that the Fireside Chat series even exists, because he didn't so much as ask me, but appointed me to the resiliency director role. And so that is why you guys are suffering through these chats today. So thank you so much for that, Shawn.
You're welcome, everyone.
Today's topic is a personal one, because we're going to talk about the impact of our work on our friends and our family. And my goal here is to sort of help people to understand how our work can bleed into other things. And it makes me think about when I first got asked to do this volunteer work, right? And I wasn't even a case manager at first, and I came in about 6 weeks after the withdrawal. So there was a lot happening before I came into things. And I had this opportunity, and I went to my partner at the time, and I was like, "Hey, I have a volunteer chance. It sounds like something I really want to do. How do you feel about it?" And his only question was, "Well, will it impact our time together?" And I immediately was like, "No, why would it do that? I won't have to go to events or cancel anything." And a year later, I think back at how naive that was, that I was thinking that I could just keep everything in a little box. Whereas yeah, I've canceled a ton of date nights, or I've been on my phone during other ones, or I had 1 month where I just wasn't sleeping, and he sort of had this zombie of a partner, and that's what it looks like. And the reason why I wanted you to come on for this specific one is because you posted about something similar recently.
Yeah, look, similar experience, right? Except for I didn't so much as ask as when I received those text messages from Lucky. I was sitting here at this table. I had just started an MBA program because I was trying to, run up my GI Bill.
Sure.
And I was in orientation, and my wife comes in to check on me because she knew that, we have a baby and we have a teenager, and she knew that I was going to be stuck up here for a day or two while I was doing this orientation. She comes in and I'm sobbing, and she's like, "What happened?" And I'm like, "Lucky is stuck in Afghanistan. I think he's going to die. I was talking to him, and now he's gone. And I don't and now I'm trying to raise money to get flights for his family out." And I was just sobbing. And she's like, "Okay, you got it." And then, things moved very quickly. 2 days later, Jack McCain was in I have a couch right over here in my office. Or Jack McCain was in our kitchen, and she got home, and she was like, she kind of came up in Republican politics, and she goes, "Is Jack McCain in my kitchen?" Yeah. And she's like, "Okay." And so that first couple weeks of August, she was very it was cool. My kids were cool. And she saw that this was something I was passionate about, but I thought this was going to be over in 2 weeks. I thought that, we would do what we could. I thought for sure the government was going to come shut us down. I thought for sure the cavalry was coming. And I thought for sure that we would need everybody to pivot over to resettlement after August 31st, or the deadline would be extended. I thought in one way or another, this would be I would take a couple weeks off of work and go and do it. And yeah, I think we all felt, we all feel a little naive. I've missed a whole bunch of important stuff for my family. But my wife has been really supportive, and really, it helps that she works in and around government, and she knows the great sacrifices that Afghans have made for Americans. And we didn't come to this for the first time in August. We've been kind of running around this for a little bit. And,
Okay.
And she's known, for example, Matt Zeller for a long time.
Okay.
So the passion that people have around this, she's kind of seen.
I just it's so tricky, because even and you have spoken about your wife's support a lot, and I can't imagine that you would still be here if you didn't have a partner like that, right? But on the other hand, you have to think that like they probably, like our families didn't know what this was going to feel like for them. Because
Yeah.
it's one thing to have a partner and to think like, yeah, I definitely want to support their passions. This is something that matters to them. And it's another for them to take that burden on. Because even if they're not directly in the community, like, I imagine your spouse has had to like pick up more of the household chores, deal with your absences a lot more. You guys are raising 2 kids, and
Mhm.
they didn't ask for that. And so I think one of the really important things that I'm seeing as like a resiliency trend is a lot of guilt, right?
Mhm.
Because we are suddenly being extremely present for Afghans and almost completely absent for the people in our lives. And at what point do we have to try to pivot and like find a good balance? Because we're now more than a year out, and I don't see a lot of good balance yet.
That's right. Well, we're at that point, right? Like we've
Yeah.
got to, everything that AfghanEvac does from the kind of the infrastructure perspective and like how we do our operations, we're trying to drive this towards sustainability. That's why we have things up on our website. That's why we built the case management system and are rolling out a new one. That's why we've done all of these things that are sustainable, that are not dependent on one person, because for a lot of reasons, right? We want our volunteers to be able to continue to show up and make this a part of their lives as kind of a civic engagement duty. Um, it They're not going to be able to do that if they break themselves, or they break their families, or they break, um, or they go too far and then they can't come back from it. So that's why we prioritize resilience so much. That's why you and I talk very publicly about this so much. And you're right, the time is now. And that's why we encourage people, even though it's really hard, and even though you feel an obligation that you have to always be on your phone, right? You have to always have this thing
Yep.
ready for you. Um, the truth is you don't. The truth is that we've got to build this in a sustainable way, that means that we have partners and we have a coalition, so that when people inevitably have to go back to their day jobs or go back to their lives, that there's folks there to catch them, and that the Afghans that they're helping don't fade into a darkness that could be assuaged simply by doing this as a team. That's why we don't allow individual contributors also, because it's really important that there are people there to hold people up.
Yeah. You said a lot of things that like really strike me as just super insightful based on like what our community is going through. And that word community, I'm using it intentionally, right? Because people are at their breaking point. They have already broken. And one of the things that you consistently hear from mental health experts is like one of the ways that you can build yourself back up is by surrounding yourself with the right people. And I say the right people, but I don't think what they mean by that is just the AfghanEvac community or just other case managers, right? Because while we can understand the experience of other people going through it, that doesn't mean that we can relieve the pressure. And one of the things that I like routinely think about is in the really early days, there was a case manager whose wife had just had a baby. And so he was sitting there and he was holding this 9-day-old baby in his arms. And then he picked up his phone and there was a photo of an Afghan being tortured. And we had this whole conversation about like, how do you bring other people into those moments? Because we feel so guilty and we know how weighed down we feel by them that we don't want to bring them into that, right? Like nobody wants to bring someone you love into something that's violent and really, really hard. But if we don't, our survival is a lot less certain. And so
Mhm.
we need to find a way to sort of introduce the topic to people and say, at the very least, maybe not like, hey, look at this picture so you know what I'm understanding,
Yeah.
but to use sort of those words to say, like, I am feeling really X and Y,
Yeah.
because human emotions, everyone can access them. It doesn't matter what triggered them. And so that's something that I keep returning to every time I hear a mental health expert talk about like the sustainability of our work. It's like, yes, definitely bond with the people in your community because they will understand, but you have to have other community elsewhere. So if we're not trying to bring them into our experience in some way, we're doing everyone a
That's right.
disservice.
That's right. So I think everything you just said is absolutely accurate. I want to address a couple of those things, right? So one, with regard to the pictures of the atrocities and things like that, like that's one thing that we try to address within our community all the time, right? We don't, it's harmful to other people to share those photos. We have reporting mechanisms. So like that's been one of the things that we've been working on through AfghanEvac for a long time, and helping people understand that like we can do a lot of harm by re-triggering other people within the community on that, right? But it's also important that we pass that on to the appropriate people. So there's a little bit of therapy in that as well, right? There's a little bit of catharsis in that when you're like able to take that and do something with it. What you said about community, I think, is absolutely on point. And you know, this week the San Diego community is lighting up all of their infrastructure in support of Afghans, and that's because you know, AfghanEvac started here, and we, you know, our members are relatively well connected into the local government. We're civically engaged people, and we've brought along our community with this, and that I think has been really key to this, I mean, to the survival of my family and my marriage, and certainly to the survival of everybody else that's able to do it. I would just encourage folks, like, one way that we can really do more good is by, one, showing Afghans that other people care. It seems silly to light buildings in the color of the Afghan flag. Well, it's not silly, because it's a symbolic gesture that in any language you can see that this community cares about Afghans and is not going to forget them, and cares about the U.S. service members that we lost at Abigail, and cares that we get this right. We brought our city council members along so that they can be engaged, because they represent these folks. And it's too easy for Afghans, you know, I've had to travel a lot. You mentioned that, you know, I've been traveling a lot. I've had to travel a lot to communities around the country to go and visit large concentrations of Afghan folks. And we don't post online about it all the time. We don't like make a big deal of it, because that's not what it's about. It's about going and connecting with these folks who are in a new place, who are scared, who don't speak the language, who government is failing them because they're not getting their documents, their benefits, all the things that they need. And you know what I hear everywhere is that I'm often the first person that has gone to see them. Yeah. And so one way that we can, that our community and that anybody that's involved in this can kind of bring other people in, is by going out and seeing Afghans, by going out and talking to your local leaders. These people represent you in Congress and the city council and the county and other places. They want to hear about this. And this is a story of, I mean, I often say that this is the most American thing I've ever been a part of, and I served in the Navy for 12 years. Americans from all walks of life, all stripes, all political backgrounds, religious, ethnic backgrounds, banding together to keep our promises. Yeah. That's some inspiring shit. And if we can bring our communities along, if we can bring our families along and help them feel a part of that, it will help us. And then sometimes it's really important to turn the phone off, turn the computer off, and walk away for a couple of days. You know, we've had pushback within the coalition from people who've said, well, I can't do that. And that's simply not true. And we have to, it's hard to do that. I mean, it's really hard to do that. But we've got to put it down sometimes for our health, and because none of us are the authority on this, right? None of us have the power to make the decision that these folks need. We can keep advocating, but there's nothing that any of us can do a world away right now to help somebody. It's not an emergency anymore. It's an urgent situation for sure. And we have to keep up the pressure, but it's not an emergency. It's not August. And there's a lot of, I see a lot of folks treating their trauma through that urgency. In the resilience chat today, we saw like urgency is a trauma response. Yep, exactly. That really spoke to me, because we see that all the time, right? There's a lot of folks that feel guilt about how this war ended, that feel guilt about what we've done, and they're spinning themselves up and trying to help, and not all of that is always helpful. We've got to be really judicious about the things that we say to people and about how we take care of ourselves. And that means sometimes shutting it down, hugging your kids, hugging your spouse, hugging your loved ones, and going for a walk, right? Like I walk through Balboa Park 3 days a week in the morning, and I don't do I try not to do AfghanEvac. I'm trying to do AfghanEvac things, but it's 5 a.m. in San Diego is 8 a.m. on the East Coast, and people are gearing up. Yep, it's me. So, you're talking about me right now. It's not just you. But yeah, no, it's hard, right? Like it's hard when I wake up from bed, I turn over and I look at this and it's full. And my inclination is to address directly and quickly any of the needs that our coalition have, because people aren't raising their voice because they're happy. People aren't raising their voice because they don't need anything. They're raising their voice because they see an issue that they think could be better. And sometimes it's a trauma response and it's not actually going to change anything. Sometimes it's something that's useful. But our team considers all of those things, but we try to be as fast as possible so we don't leave people hanging.
Yeah.
And it has an impact on me and it has an impact on my wife.
Right.
So, it sucks, but
you said a lot of things that like I do want to follow up on. One was I thought the way you sort of pivoted to your understanding of community was really interesting to me, because the topic here is supposed to be, hey, how does this affect friends and family? And as you were talking about, like, call your local politicians and get, your cities involved, I was thinking about like some of my greatest support systems have been people who I bring into the work, but there are automatic boundaries in place. So like I, in doing resiliency, will cold email people at my job. I work at VA all the time. And I'll say, do you want to come and help us? What would that look like? But because we're professionals, I can get their support in a way where like, I can't cross that boundary. And that has been super helpful for me. And they, especially because I work in this field, are really good at setting the boundaries for me. So like, I think there's this notion of sort of a non-traditional community that if we could pull on them, we can still get support in a way that feels authentic. Like another one is, when I started doing this, my communications teacher from undergrad reached out and she wanted to use this as her project. And I thought, my gosh, that's so much work. Am I going to be able to do it? And reconnecting with her and her students was a blessing, because every message I got was from people who wanted to support us and who were putting in work, but who like there was this sort of professionalism involved. So they could understand it, but we couldn't cross that boundary. And I found that network to be hugely helpful.
Sounds like you like boundaries.
We're gonna do a fireside on those, Shawn.
I want to make a point about what you just said. You're like, couldn't agree more. I've had a lot of folks from my day job have been involved as well, outside of the day job stuff, right? And yeah, there's certain boundaries we have to put in place. And I think, I talked a lot about the community leaders, because when they talk about stuff, a lot of people see it and we get a bunch of people that come in. But you're absolutely right. People like my neighbor is involved in this. She's on our team. We've been pulling people in because that support system matters, right? And like folks here in San Diego have been really just remarkable at showing up and people who do the thing professionally. So like communications professionals have come in to help us. People who are technical professionals have come in to help. People who are kind of management professionals have come in to help us. And nobody's asking, nobody's paid on our team. Everybody's doing it all volunteer.
Right.
But those boundaries are really important. And sometimes things take a little longer because we're all volunteers. But having that understanding and talking about that and saying that aloud, I think is really important. That's a form of a boundary.
Yeah. And I think your point about people, it's been so hard sometimes to watch people say that they can't be afforded a break, because I absolutely understand. And again, like it does go back to this understanding of like urgency is a trauma response, because we feel like if we are threatened by something, we have to immediately address it or it will get worse. Right. Yep. So it's not that I don't understand where it's coming from, but I genuinely haven't spoken to a single expert who puts any sort of weight behind that, because what is going to happen? Yeah. Like if you're not getting, I read the most interesting statistic that if you only get 4 hours of sleep, it is akin to being intoxicated. And so we have people who have been doing that for over a year now, just a bunch of drunks out there. But like, it matters that we give ourselves the time to go and engage with the people who make us feel fulfilled. It feels like it's not directly related, but it is very much a secondary way of supporting our work.
That's absolutely right, Kate. And, we've had folks that have had serious medical issues arise because they haven't put down the phone. And, at AfghanEvac, we think a lot about like, we don't direct anybody. We don't direct organizations to do anything. We have some certain boundaries around what folks, like the commitments that people make when they come in. And, we're weighing the idea of like, do we have to set some health boundaries here? Like if you're having, we don't want people to not, not verbalize it. That's why we
Right.
haven't done it yet. But like, nobody's useful to Afghans or the coalition or to this work if they're, stuck in the hospital and they can't exist. If they're hurting themselves, it's not good. And talking to other people around the coalition, people are willing to pick up the weight. Like we've seen, I've, there's sometimes a little bit of conflict amongst the coalition, but there's so much inspiring work happening both in the kind of the common spaces, but also on the side, people working together that would never be across the table from one another if not for this, right? Like we're so proud of how this community has come together. We're so proud of the grace that people show for one another, and we're so proud that we haven't thrown a bunch of people out. We're proud that we've been able to, I mean, there's people that are like, sometimes it's
hard, yeah, when you're working this closely, yeah.
There's challenges that arise, personality and otherwise, when working this closely. And for us, and just in case anybody's wondering, for us, the reason why that we're so reticent to ever move anybody out is because there are Afghans on the other side of folks.
Right.
So we talk to people a lot about like, hey, make sure you're putting out good information. Hey, make sure you're not breaking the law. Hey, make sure that you're thinking about the impact on your life and the impact that the advice you're giving is having on Afghans. Hey, don't give immigration advice if you're not an immigration attorney.
Yeah.
We default to reminders rather than swift action, except when people are treating their fellow coalition members like trash, right? If you're treating somebody like your staff, or you're treating them with not being kind or with no dignity, then you don't have any place here.
It's so hard because, of course, like other members of the coalition are the only people who can really understand what we're going through. And that's like a really special but difficult trauma bond, right? It's not just like a normal friendship. It's like we have bonded over this difficult thing, and that can sort of taint the well. On the other hand, it can lead to some really wonderful experiences. Like I work, now for Task Force Nix. I've never met the two women who run that group. They were the first two people I told when I got engaged. Like absolutely, unhesitatingly, they were the most excited, and I love them with my whole heart. And I think like it matters when you can find people like that.
Yeah.
In contrast, I think that one of the things that I have personally struggled with is, how do you explain this work to people who aren't in it?
Mm-hmm.
And the night that I think of, and I just wrote a piece about this that I hope we can put out there, is a night in February when some of my Afghans were taken. And I was supposed to go and have a little slumber party with my nephew who had just moved to DC. And I had this sense of, I couldn't get my head straight, because I wanted him to feel loved and I wanted him to feel seen. I wanted to have fun, but I did have a clock that was ticking and I didn't know how to address it. I felt really overwhelmed. And then the one thing I was thinking was like, I also don't know how to explain this to people who aren't in this world, because is my 22-year-old nephew going to understand that I am dealing with the Taliban? It makes no sense. You know what I mean? Like, and so there's this reticence of like, how do you bring people into this world without also feeling ridiculous? And maybe that's just me, but like, I really struggled to find the right way to like add credibility to my experience in a way that I thought other people could relate to. And things became a hell of a lot easier when I started relying on talking about my emotional burden as opposed to what was causing it. Because
Absolutely.
a 22-year-old might not be able to understand the Taliban, but they can definitely understand like stress and trauma and loss of life. And so that's what I sort of had to go back to. And that's when my community really started to figure out like, oh, we're hearing a need. She is voicing things about depression and being overwhelmed. And like, that's what people can latch onto. So that made my sense of community a lot better.
Absolutely. So I think you bring up some really important stuff there, right? So my response has been to bring people in my community into AfghanEvac or into the work.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely saying, talking about, for me, a lot of the stress is both what you just described, like when we have a burning platform, and then I'm just going to be really honest, right? Like it hurts me when we deliver on something for one group of the coalition, and then another group is like, hey, fuck you. And it's like, man, we've got 200 groups here. Some are active, some are not, but we've got 200 groups here, and we're consistently delivering for all of the different groups. But not everything can be a win for everybody. And it often feels like we're not allowed to have a win. It often feels like it's never good enough. It often feels, and that has an impact on everybody in the coalition. So like, I've got thick skin, like yell at me all day. I don't give a shit.
No, nobody take that advice. Don't yell at Shawn all day, guys.
It's when people who are not active, not visibly active, but are active on the sides, message me and say, hey man, I just can't take this anymore. I can't take the constant bickering. I can't take the constant, the constant complaints from, a small group of people who just refuse to accept that the majority, according to our surveys, according to like the constant feedback that we solicit, like I just can't take the abuse. And people like in people's DMs, we know that there are people, I don't know who, but I know that there are people that go into others' DMs and just abuse them when they say anything that's not a complaint, anything that's not that's supportive of the work that some groups are doing. And it really just that impacts me greatly, because I don't want any of our volunteers to feel like they don't have a place here. I don't want any of our volunteers who are doing the work, who are showing up, who are visibly working their asses off and doing everything that they possibly can to help Afghans. I don't want them to leave because somebody is upset about something that has nothing to do with helping Afghans. Like, I just have no space for people that, one, want to make this all about them. This is supposed to be about Afghans. This is supposed to be about us stepping up and helping people with a hand up to realize their American dream, or realize their dream of wherever it is that they're going. It's not supposed to be about who's on the news, or it's not supposed to be about, who's in the government meetings, who has no reason to be there. So that stuff has a big impact on me. But I also recognize that that's a trauma response. I recognize that these folks are sometimes acting that way because they're hurting. And so, like I said, I'm happy to take the abuse. It's when people treat other coalition members poorly, that's like the one thing that'll get you gone.
I don't know though. I sense like frustration and hurt in what you're saying, and I get it. Like, we are a family, and I hate saying that about coalitions or organizations, but like, we are a group that has come together, by choice. But sometimes that means we get a little too like comfortable, and we're willing to sort of lash out as opposed to try to like build on that sense of we are a team and we are working on the same side. And
I'd really just like folks to keep our guiding principles in mind, right? Like, just let's take care of, let's make sure that everything we're doing helps Afghans or helps our volunteers. And if it doesn't, let's not do it. And let's not do things that aren't working. Let's be willing to hear some feedback from one another. And then let's also be willing to accept that with 200 people, you're never going to be happy about everything. And then, just treat one another with kindness and dignity and respect. And if we do that, this thing can last a long time. If we don't, then it won't last.
We are almost out of time. I've actually let this go over a little bit because I thought it was very interesting. But there was one other thing that you had said that I did want to get back to, which was the physical impact of this work on people. Right. So like, the topic of this chat is the impact on friends and family. And I think we have this understanding that if we hold this closely enough, we are protecting our community, like our outside people, from being pulled too deeply into something that's really hard, as though there is not like an observable impact on us. And one of the calls that have broken me over the last year is multiple women who have celebrated a pregnancy and then had to work through a pregnancy loss that is very directly attributed to the stress, my cat feeder, to the stress of what's been going on. And so we can say like, well, by holding it in, I'm protecting other people, but when your body is suffering, other people suffer. And another story that's been out there, and I don't want to speak about it as though I am an expert in this topic, but last year at Abbey Gate, we lost service members. And a few weeks ago, one of the brothers of the service members committed suicide. And when you read the family statements, they very directly link the loss of one son to the other.
Absolutely.
And so, and the mother has made some comments about, I wish that I had known, what this impact was or how to talk about it. So we can do our best to sort of pull ourselves into this world and hold it really tight because we think we're protecting people. But by taking that on, like, it has a direct impact on our friends and family. So I don't think that the goal here needs to be don't bring anybody in. It needs to be, how do we do it in a way that honors our experience, but still doesn't make us feel like we're overloading others? And I think for me, it goes back to speak to your emotions, not so much the reason for them. People can understand like grief, they can understand loss, especially when it's been going on for a year. That's the language that I've started to use, and that has made it a lot easier for people to sort of relate to the work.
So I want to make a couple points there. Couldn't agree more. We talk a lot about the moral injury associated with this effort and with the withdrawal. Some people like to talk about the moral injury on veterans. I reject the notion that this only impacts veterans. In fact,
I'm a civilian, for anyone who doesn't know. I get that question a lot.
We see in our coalition that President Biden ran on restoring the soul of America. I've never seen the soul of America in DC. It's kind of a soulless place. But I see the soul of America every single day across this wide coalition. Surely there are veterans. There are also frontline civilians who deployed to Afghanistan, aid workers, diplomats, intelligence community folks who deployed to Afghanistan, a children's book author who's never been to Afghanistan, tons of people, a cross-section of America, a cross-section of American society, a cross-section of the American and the Afghan experience. And so many of them are not veterans. And yet, so many of them, including government workers who worked on this, volunteers, aid workers, everybody, have this shared experience and this shared moral injury. And I think it's so important to talk about it. And look, we have our resilience resources. We have these fireside chats. We have a lot of things that we put out there. But it's so important for people to go into their primary care provider, into getting the help in their community, in their structures, and their healthcare plans. And then I'll leave you with a story about something that really impacted me recently. So last week I was in New York for an event, and on the flight home, the day before, or the day I flew home in the evening, I took a call from a reporter who was talking about the moral injury associated with this. And she was asking me about volunteers and asking me about the coalition, how everybody's doing. And I can talk about it at length. And then she took me by surprise and she said, "How are you doing? How is this impacting you?" And I was like, whew, and I got through it. But I was off kilter for the rest of the day. And then I told my wife, I said, "Man, this is really hard. I've had, today's been challenging." And as I was getting on the plane, she sent me a picture of her baby, and it just crushed me. Like I sobbed intermittently on the flight, like trying to keep it to myself. I was really lucky. I got upgraded to first class because I've been flying a lot. And I just tried to sit in my corner and just like sit in it and experience it. But I told a lot of people, I talked to a lot of people. And I did a Twitter thread about it, right? Because for me, and I think for a lot of people, the only way to get over this is to get through it, right? And the only way to get through it is to talk about it and to have conversations and share with people where you're at. Like you were saying, you have to talk about the impact and you talk about the feelings. And for me, it was that my daughter was, God, she's 2 now. She was just a little over a year old when all of this started, right? So I've missed a lot because I've been gone, and it like just crushes me, right? And I think about little Afghan girls whose dads and moms are gone. I think about these families who are struggling through all of this and that just how it must feel for them. And that's what got me that day. but I did a Twitter thread about it, and I talked about it to the, we have a core team of volunteers that help with the administration of the coalition. And I talked about it with some folks there. I think I shared with you. And that helped me so that by the time I landed, it was like I was exhausted. I had a couple drinks. I shouldn't do. I was thinking like maybe I shouldn't do this.
It happens.
And I just tell folks, we know you're hurting. Folks are hurting all over the place. And if you're not, that's okay too. Don't be afraid to talk to people about it.
Yeah. The last thing I want to say is that I remember talking to you last week when you were going through that moment. And I remember seeing you post a thread about it. And I remember being like, I was having a very different response to that moment than you were, because I sighed with relief. I remember thinking, Shawn has to be on all the time as a leader of a coalition. Like, he has to come in here and act a certain way. He has to maintain the respect and the strength and all of those things. And in my opinion, one of your greatest moments of leadership was in your vulnerability, because what you were feeling that day was really fucking hard and also really fucking human. You were a dad who missed his kid, and every single one of us has missed something and felt guilty about it. And I think it really matters when leadership is willing to come out and say, this is part of it.
Absolutely.
And this is personal, right? I can't speak for anybody else, but I remember thinking that I was really proud of you. And so like, this is the note that we should end on, right? Which is that friends and family, they're impacted by this, and we can't pretend that they're not, but there is a way that we can navigate it so that we feel supported and they feel supported. And I think that a huge part of that is in acknowledging what the experience is. It feels really bad sometimes.
Yeah.
It's also a choice that we're making to stay in it. So let's find a way,
Yep.
And so I just, from my perspective as a leader, that was one of your best moments. And I was really happy to see it. Not that you were going through it, but you know what I mean.
Look, it would be disingenuous to act like this isn't hard, right? And like for me, I think it's really important. So kind of the marks of character for me, the things that I view as a mark of character, do people show up? Do people who say they care about a thing show up?
Yeah.
Do they show up when it's hard? Do they show up when it's uncomfortable? And are we intellectually honest about these things, right? Like, we have to tell the truth. We cannot sell this as like door kicking, going behind enemy lines to rescue Afghans, because that's not what it is. It's hard. We're stepping up. We're filling a gap that we wish wasn't there. But we can't be dishonest about it, right? We can't overblow what we're doing, and we've got to be honest with people. And I'm hopeful that we fostered that environment within the coalition. I don't know that it's always true, but I'm hopeful that we have. And I'd say that I'm really proud of what we've accomplished together, and it's a testament to the character of all of the people that are involved. So thank you, and thank you for continuing to show up and continuing to do the resilience work. I know that it's really hard to take on everybody else's trauma. Yeah. And so I just want to say thank you for always handling this with such dignity and aplomb. And I mean, you're a badass, Kate. So thank you.
That's what I tell myself every day. Y'all, thank you for tuning in. I really think that this was a really hugely important fireside chat. And I think if we take away anything from it, it's the notion that the fact, like the belief that we can handle this on our own is a myth. We have communities, whether in AfghanEvac or friends and family. We just need to find the right way to bring them in. So thank you very much, Shawn, for sharing. And I'm going to stop recording.
Thank you.